Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Cremando for YogaUOnline, and I'm here today with Susi Hately. Susi is the owner and principal teacher at Functional Synergy, Inc. She holds a degree in kinesiology, which was focused strongly on exercise physiology. Susi's been a yoga teacher and yoga therapist for over 20 years and has worked extensively with clients who have chronic pain conditions or are post-rehab from accidents, cancer care, hip or other joint replacements, and the like. In addition to her teaching and her private therapy practice, her first book, Anatomy and Asana, was published in 2004, and it was followed by more books, educational DVDs and videos, and yoga therapy trainings for healthcare professionals and yoga teachers. So Susi, welcome. And all of that makes you perfect for our topic today, because I would like to delve into an area that I think is a little bit easy to overlook in the yoga world. I kind of like to think of it as the underserved population of the anatomy groups, and that is the care and nurturing of our feet.
Yes.
I think it's really easy to take advantage of our feet as just these two flat things that go flipping and flopping, and they play some role in balance. But in fact, the feet are a major aspect in posture, gait, pelvic floor health, breath support, just some of the areas. So I'm hoping that to start us off, you could put some context around the feet.
Sure.
Why should we care?
Why should we care about the feet? Well, thanks for having me. And this will be fun, because what's so interesting is that we're all connected, right? From foot to head. So even though this is about the feet, it's also going to be about in relationship. And you made a really good point to that. Like, it has an impact on our breathing, it has an impact on our hips. They have the impact, like it's far reaching with gait and posture. And I mean, what I love about the feet is the feet punctuate our posture. Right? And I'm using my hands here right now, but if I have my skeleton guy here, it's like the feet punctuate the posture, and like they're the ones that are touching the ground. So the weight and the load that comes through the body comes onto the feet, and then the ground reaction force from the ground comes up through our body. So how our feet are functioning has a real impact on the way the whole body is going to then absorb load. But then how the whole body, like the infrastructure and the integrity of the body, if that's a little bit wonky, then a side effect of that is that our feet can then get wonky. So there's a real communication between both, and that the feet are a base, and as I like to say, like the metaphor of punctuating our posture, and then how that infrastructure and integrity of our posture has such an impact on the feet.
You know, I love that whole concept, and even as you're talking and you're showing, I'll get my skelly up here, you're showing the bottoms of the feet. I'm thinking this is some of the most proprioceptive, dense areas of the body, and they really are the communication point to the world, to the earth, literally to the earth. Mm-hmm. So in addition to, and just even as you're showing it, if you're just a little bit off in the feet, it's going to go all the way up the chain, because it is all connected.
Yes, and likewise, it can, if we're off above, then it can go down towards the feet, and then that can impact our proprioceptive ability to feel the ground, right? So it's like it can land, like it's that point of connection of the feet, whether the issue is in the feet or whether the issue is being expressed in the feet. Mm-hmm. It will impact that proprioceptive connection and that communication mechanism from the ground up, and then from up to the ground, like that back and forth. So it's a way of kind of looking at like a hub, right? A communication hub between that which is external to internal, internal to external, going through the feet.
So that really brings up that issue, a little bit of the biomechanics, because that's a really subtle dance that the foot does with the ground, isn't it, when you walk?
Yes. And so a lot of people, and if I show it from this angle with my skeleton, is that a lot of people think that the foot just kind of goes works in one,
Yes.
just up and down. And the reality is, I mean, we could break down the movement of the foot through the gait pattern like for hours, really. But there is that plantar and dorsiflexion that are going on with the foot. But there's also a rotational element of how, like, ideally, of how we move through. Now, I say ideally because different people have different things going on with their feet, and so they don't have whatever is considered ideal. But yeah, I mean, there's 3 points to the foot. There's the hind foot, which is really the heel of the foot. There's the midfoot, or the middle of the foot, which is like the what we call the tarsals, and then we have the metatarsals and the phalanges, which are the toes. That's the forefoot. And so how each of those integrate is really necessary. And then there's muscle and tissue that helps to make the arches and create or support the arches of the foot, both superficial, both on top or dorsally, and both on the bottom. And then what's interesting too is it's not just the intrinsic musculature and tissue that's here, but it's also what carries up through the leg, because we have got muscles that are in the calf and the shin area, which also attach onto the foot. So then really what goes on with the calf is going to impact the way that foot moves through that gait pattern. Right. So our ability to plantar and dorsiflex, that ability for that foot to move through a transverse plane as we go through the gait, to go from like through that pronation supination phase, like it's not just an intrinsic foot function, although we need to look intrinsically, we need to look locally at the foot, but it's also what's going on further afield, and then even further afield again, because if I take, I'm going to pick up a pelvis here in a second. If I take this pelvis and I show you here, right, the pelvis and the leg bone. So here's the femur sitting into the hip socket. That leg bone is swinging through that pelvis. Now, if I show it on skeleton here, how that leg bone is swinging on the pelvis, right? So how that leg bone swings in the pelvis, the foot's the bottom of that kinetic chain. So how that foot is placed and how that heel can be placed and how it then starts to move through its gait pattern has an impact or can be influenced by what goes on between this hip joint and what goes on with that pelvis, right? So we can keep that conversation really going on up further of the chain of how does this foot, it not functioning well, impact the knee and impact the hip and impact the pelvis and impact the pelvic floor and impact the diaphragm. And I can keep going up higher. And then how do each of these pieces that are above impact the way that load and forces and our body weight is then transferred down to the foot, so that intrinsically, can the foot bear that load or not? And so we can work locally at that foot to support its ability to absorb and dissipate. And then we can also improve the infrastructure and their integrity further up the chain so that it can do its job.
So 2 things come to mind. The first one is I was in a thing with Tom Meyers, and most of our audience knows who Tom Meyers is. He's the great, I guess I would call him an anatomist at this point. I don't know what to call him. But he's worked on these anatomy trains, and he had people do an experiment where they moved their neck. And then he had them wiggle their toes and move their neck, and everybody's neck got more movement. So it just completely underlines the point you're making, that it's one chain. And the other thing I think of is that great saying that correlation is not causation.
Yes.
And so what you're saying, I think, is if you feel something in your foot, you might have something in your foot, and you might have something in your hip, or you might have something in your shoulder. It doesn't mean what you're feeling is what you're feeling.
Right.
And what you think you're feeling.
Yeah. And then that may cause concern or like confusion for people. So then what I say is, let's start at the foot and let's explore the foot and really play around with the foot. Notice when you play around with the foot, what happens not only in the foot, but further up the chain, like what Tom was doing. And like we've done with balls, like do roll out your hip and notice what happens with your foot, roll up your foot, notice what happens with your forward bends and stuff like that. Like there's all sorts of like fun little games you can play where you can not only see the impact locally to where the stimulus actually is, but then further afield, because when you start to notice what's going on further afield, you start to see like how we hold our jaw, or how we hold our neck, or how just the tension further up, or a compensation further up. Because some people, when they've got pain, when they've got, whether it's a foot pain or whether it's a knee issue or a hip issue, they can kind of lift themselves up and hold tension up in here. That kind of takes their weight up and out a little bit. And then as they start to release some of these other areas, not only that can let go, and then we can better absorb and move load better. I mean, the foot, you might now feel more in your foot. You might feel your foot being better, but it just, you start to get a better understanding of what's contributing to why your foot is feeling the way it is, why your foot is, I'll use the word behaving the way it is, like why it might be in a functional supination or pronation state, like why, like if you're wanting to shift up, like even with bunions, like the thing that's really curious about bunions is that you can, like I've worked with clients whose shoes are great and they're not people who've worn heels and worn shoes that aren't good for their feet, but then they've got bunions. And then as we start to kind of work through them, much like plantar fasciitis, as we work through the chain, it's like, wait a second, like their bunions started to improve as things started to shift elsewhere and through the myofascial meridians elsewhere that were contributing to that experience. So then it's like, yeah, work at the area locally, start to play with that, then start to see if you're getting change or not. And if you get some intermittent relief, then you know you're on the right track. And then just start to allow yourself to zoom out a little bit, start to take more of like, rather than being on a ground level, sort of 5-foot view, kind of pull back a little bit, go to like 10-foot view or 20-foot view and really see, okay, what else is either contributing or related to, like maybe you notice your knees are falling in, which might mean that something's going on at your hips. And then you just start to put the puzzle pieces together of why this is expressing the way it is.
What I love about that is you're not looking at the foot, you're looking at the person. You're looking at everything. You're looking at all the parts. That brings up an interesting, to me, I'm going to go back to my original point of people who do yoga are generally interested in connection, in connecting things, in relationships. And yet a lot of times in practice, like say an Ashtanga vinyasa, just to pick one,
sure,
there isn't a foot exercise. There isn't like now let's work on ankle mobility, or let's work on, the arches of your foot. What should yogis take away from this, what you're telling us about the foot? What is the role that yoga can play in, let's call it the care and feeding of healthy feet and therefore healthy systems, really?
That's a great question. And I'll answer it with a short story where I was working with a structural integrator. So someone who was trained in the system that's Tom's system. And she was close to a yoga studio. And so I said to her, you must see a lot of yoga people. She goes, oh yeah, I see a lot of yoga people. And I said, all right, so tell me. It's like, how runners, they got sprained ankles and knees and hips. And we generally know that with different activities, there's like the thing. I said, so tell me, like, what is it with yoga people? It's like SI, his knees. Like, what? She goes, feet. I'm like, what? Are you serious? And she's like, yeah, I mean, there are the SI and the knee issues for sure. Those are high on the list. But when you really look closely at it, a big reason for why those are happening or what is not happening with feet. And then as I thought about it, and she and I talked more about it as I continued to work with her, when I looked at the system of yoga that was being practiced in and around that area, there's a lot of like pulling up of the arches. There's a lot of like,
oh God, that's so common.
Yeah, and doing things with the toes. And so there's actually a lot of compensation happening through the feet as opposed to function through the feet. So I think that can tend to happen. Like I've heard a lot of, like, not that these cues are bad. I don't want the listener to get that impression, but I want people to critically think about, like, are you actually getting what you want out of the cue you're giving? So sometimes people will say, you got your feet on the mat, now split the mat. Like say you're standing in Tadasana or going into chair pose, split the mat like left to right, and you'll feel something in the outer hip. And it's like, are you really? Like, be sure, like, are you actually doing that? Or are you generating more of the muscle force from your foot, and more of the work is coming from your foot as opposed to from your hip, for example? So there's a number of things that people are doing, like lifting the arches of the feet, which actually can create more tension in the feet and less suppleness and less sort of receptivity of the feet. And then so that's one thing to think about. The other is to think about is like consider, like, if you're in a practice that doesn't have a lot of foot care, like specific, then massage out your feet before you begin, right? Like, get your fingers between the toes. Get your thumbs into some of that plantar musculature and tissue. Wiggle around those metatarsals. Like, so if I got the foot here, it's like wiggle around, you know, the metatarsals here. Like, get into that foot and kind of like get a feel, particularly if you're not in an environment like we're certainly entering into fall here in Canada. It's starting to get colder. And if you're wearing flip-flops like I do in the summer, like chances are calves are a little bit tighter, and you know, things like that are starting to happen. So it's like, get in there and kind of explore and really sort of get in there. And you might be surprised at how amazing your practice feels when you start to do that. But just take some time, knowing that it's not unlike running, it's not unlike cycling, that those practices or those activities, they're great for certain aspects of our body. And then we need to do things to support ourselves to do them. So if you have a tendency towards a system or a way of practicing that really is about something else, then just don't forget about your feet. And you might find the practice just starts to grow that much more.
You know, I like what you said about the self-myofascial release in the feet, because I've been doing a lot of work with my groups on fall prevention for months now. And one of the ways I started was to have them take one foot and do a lot of the kinds of stuff that I know that you do, where you're massaging the foot and you're rolling and you're separating them. You're doing all that stuff, and you're even cogitating a little bit in the calcaneus there. And then I'll have them stand up and pick the non-working, the foot up that they didn't massage, and just stand there and balance without doing any warm up, without doing anything. Stand up and balance, and then put the other foot on the floor and take the foot you just worked off. And and I always have them do it by a chair, because I know they're going to fall over. And so just that whole thing of waking up your feet would make even, I think, the rest of an asana practice so much more powerful.
And you think about how, like, a lot of foot kind of, I'll use the word tightness loosely, but like tension and foot pain and heel pain starts to grow after you're 40, well into your 60s. And this just starts to get kind of a bigger issue. And then where people tend to go is not necessarily massaging up feet, but instead use really comfortable shoes, which is a great thing to do to get around, but you're actually not solving the problem that actually is. Well, you're solving a problem because now the person can get out and do some things, but you're actually not solving the mechanical issue that is. And then what you'll find is that then there'll be other issues further up the chain that then starts to become a little less functional. So it's great, I know, because just by being able to give a bit more receptivity, get some more suppleness in the tissue down there, you just get a better sense of grounding. Like I said at the beginning, like, you punctuate your posture, right? And then the rest of you can just stand up so much more effectively, that if, yes, you think about some of those practices, which aren't really like a foot focused practice, that by doing something like that, you'd be surprised at just how smooth and fluid and calm and quiet the practice can be for yourself.
I don't think anybody would use those words, smooth and fluid and calm and quiet, thinking about the sole of the foot. So that's just like really a fresh, I love that.
Yeah, well, the sole, think about the sole, S-O-U-L of the foot.
Yeah, but S-O-L-E. But wow, what a great, the sole is on the sole.
There you go.
I love that. Yeah. Now, when the feet are not efficient, when the neuromuscular signals are not efficient, going from the feet up through the kinetic chain, and the load is off kilter. I know from my work with arthritis that that's going to affect articular surfaces of bones. But what else do you see from that kind of a dysfunctional, either a dysfunctional gait pattern or in either top down or bottom up? But what are the kinds of effects that we find over time?
Well, I mean, there's so many. I think the ones that are very predominant are, and I'm not going to say it's causal because I can't say that, because when people come to see me and they have issues that aren't like specifically feet issues that they're coming with, but say that they're SI or they're piriformis or lower back, or that's more the name of it, even quadratus lumborum or psoas, like they might be, that might be the thing that's getting their attention. But invariably what we'll notice is that there is a disconnect between their hips and their feet, or there's a disconnect between their shoulders and their feet. And so as we might settle out some of the symptoms that are further up the chain, but we have to then ultimately reconnect to the feet. Because again, the feet punctuate the posture. The feet are that base. And so when we get the pelvis working, the legs working, and when I say about a better connection between the hips and the feet, what we know for sure that there's like an overpronation of the foot you can see it all the way up through the hip. Like that's a pattern that is well known. We can see a pattern of over-supination well up to the hip. I've seen people who, when they are sort of on their way to needing a total or a partial knee replacement, that their foot will often start to shift. Maybe their toes will start to get really, really grippy, finding some ways to keep balance when they're not getting that inherent balance through your system, because the integrity of their system is just starting to kind of, you're losing a little bit of that infrastructure balance. And so people find those ways. And so when those types of situations get improved upon, whether it's been they've actually gotten the partial knee replacement or total knee replacement, then when that piece of infrastructure is now a bit better, now we can get back to the feet, help those feet kind of loosen up, find better balance, and then you'll see that the rest of the chain starts to like run way more fluidly.
Awesome. All right, I can't let you go since we're in a yoga discussion without talking about the breath.
Yes.
Because it is my favorite thing to talk about, and the feet. Can you give us just a little take on the breath and the feet and that relationship?
The way that I have seen it, particularly when it comes to foot pain, is obviously when we're in a pain space, when we can connect with that breath and just down regulate everything, then people will often notice the shift in the pain level. But we can also see just a difference in the malleability of the tissue. Some people have gone so far as to say that there's a relationship between overpronation and the actual diaphragm. I can't respond to that specifically because I've never actually I haven't seen that in, say, like in a cadaver lab per se. But there is something in relationship to how the arches of your foot are placed, and then what goes on with your pelvic floor, and that then tunes into how that inner body system is breathing. So there is definitely something there, but I prefer, from what I know and I've seen and can definitely put like a palpation to, is just as we settle in with that breath and as we allow that to become more quiet, the impact on the tissue overall. And even just like, it's not that the center of gravity drops a little bit, but just as we relax a little bit more, how we can get more grounded and more in our legs and then more in our feet, and just allow those feet to be the basic support that they can be.
Awesome. And you mentioned pain. I'm glad you mentioned pain, because anyone who's suffered through plantar fasciitis can attest that is some pretty, foot pain is nothing to kind of take lightly, but certainly plantar fasciitis, which is one of the major complaints. And it's a lot of yogis who will talk about plantar fasciitis. And you have a course coming up for us where you're specifically going to talk about plantar fasciitis. So what is going to happen in this course? And will there be more of this kind of really rich background that you're giving us now?
Yeah, so we're going to be digging into not only the foot itself, but also these kinetic chains related to the foot. And so the foot and the body relationship. So again, it's like you can work with the bottom of the foot, help yourself. So you take those first steps in the morning that are like, oh, you've got me to do, right? And to a place where you can start to get more suppleness, so that heel pain, that tension through that tissue of the plantar surface of the foot can start to settle up. But then actually like get into it. Like, okay, what is contributing to why this is even speaking up? Like, why is this the expression of the dysfunction that's present in your body? And when I say dysfunction, I don't mean that badly. It's more like there's a limitation, and it's being expressed in this area. And oftentimes we can't resolve what we're unaware of because we're unaware of it. So this is just a process that will help you introduce you to your foot, recognize what's going on related to plantar fasciitis and these myofascial chains that we can really work with, and how we can improve other parts of our body to then support what's going on in our foot, and then have happy feet again, really.
Once we have, so I just want to talk about the itis portion of fasciitis, which means inflammation. So that is the bottom of the foot really inflamed. It's quite a painful condition. Is yoga helpful in some of these techniques you talked about? Can they mitigate both the inflammatory condition, but also just the pain situation?
Oh yeah. The key is knowing how you're applying it. And we'll be digging into that. But yeah, absolutely it can be. Like it's plantar fasciitis is absolutely something that can shift and that can change. That doesn't have to be a part of your life. And yoga can also remain very much a part of that. Might need to be adjusted in the early term as you figure out some of these mechanical issues that are related to why plantar fasciitis exists. But as you figure those out, getting back to your regular practice is absolutely a possibility.
Awesome. All right. So the name of the course that's coming up, Yoga for Healthy Feet, Improving Myofascial Efficiency to Reduce Plantar Fasciitis. I think improving myofascial efficiency is just a good idea anyway, isn't it?
Yes, I'm with you on that one. And we're going to be talking all about the feet in relationship to
So it's a good class for anyone who has feet, or knows someone with feet.
Yeah, I'm so much of my practice is with people with plantar fasciitis. So it comes from a wealth of like clinical knowledge, studio-based studio knowledge. So anyone with feet, anyone who works with people with feet, anyone who works with people with foot soreness in the feet, and who wants to just really learn more about how to take care of your feet.
Awesome. Well, I am looking forward to that. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information. Lot to, let's see, I'm thinking of a foot metaphor. I don't have one.
The soul and the soul, I think, is the one we're going to use.
Soul and soul.
Yes. Awesome.
So thank you, Susie. This has been great. And I can't wait for your course. So we'll see you then.
Thanks so
much. See you all there.
Bye.
We'll meet y'all at Susie's course.
See you then, everyone.